They weren't just actors. They were warriors, bruisers, rebels, men who lived through gunfire, gang fights, prison yards, and battlefield hell long before Hollywood ever gave them a spotlight. Forget Hollywood's modern tough guys with choreographed punches and CGI explosions. These legends didn't pretend to be dangerous. They were. They walked onto set with fresh bruises, haunted pasts, and the kind of scars makeup could never fake. Some survived shark-infested waters after a plane crash. Others knocked out co-stars in real brawls or filmed entire movies with broken ribs and collapsed lungs. A few were decorated war heroes. Others grew up dodging bullets in back alleys or threw punches in real street fights long before they ever hit the big screen. In this countdown, we're not just ranking famous actors. We're exposing the truth behind the myth, the real lives that shaped these legends. They didn't need stunt doubles. Their pain was authentic. Their silence wasn't brooding, it was trauma. Because once you see what these men went through before fame, you'll never look at their films the same way again. These aren't just actors, they're survivors. And by the end of this list, one thing will be clear. You don't play tough. You either are or you're not. War-scarred icons. Who were they? Before they ever saw a script, these men saw war, not on a movie screen, but in the mud, blood, and horror of real combat. And it changed them forever. Lee Marvin wasn't just another rugged face in gritty war flicks. He was a Marine scout sniper in the Pacific Theater. He landed at Saipan, where he was shot in the foot and backside while watching his best friend die beside him. He never glamorized violence. He lived with it. His performances in The Dirty Dozen and Point Blank carried a haunted energy because he never left the battlefield behind. His tombstone doesn't mention Hollywood. It simply reads, Lee Marvin, PFC, U.S. Marine Corps, WWE. Charles Durning stormed Omaha Beach on D-Day. He was shot in the hip, chest, and leg. He killed enemy soldiers in brutal hand-to-hand combat and escaped a German prison camp. The trauma followed him for life. He rarely spoke of the war and refused any role that made battle look beautiful. Acting wasn't a performance, it was therapy. And then there's Audie Murphy, the most decorated U.S. soldier of World War II. He held off an entire German company using a burning tank destroyer. He earned every combat medal America could give. When he played himself into hell and back, he downplayed what he actually did. Quiet and small in stature, Murphy had more confirmed kills than any character he ever portrayed. Yet, off-screen, he was tormented by PTSD, often sleeping with a loaded pistol under his pillow. These weren't actors trained to look like soldiers. They were real soldiers who later picked up a script. And when the cameras rolled, they didn't need direction. They just remembered what it cost to survive. We love legends because they show us what we could be, if only we were tougher, bolder, more fearless. But these men, they weren't just stories. They were storms in human form. They fought real wars, faced real demons, and carried real wounds into the spotlight. And whether it was on horseback, behind a rifle, or throwing a punch, they did it without flinching. In an age of movie magic, these actors proved that some legends aren't made in Hollywood. They're forged in fire and remembered in silence. Who were the real-life street fighters? Not every Hollywood badass came from a battlefield. Some earned their stripes in prison yards, dive bars, and the back streets of real life. These men didn't need war medals. They had scars you couldn't fake. Danny Trejo grew up in East LA, in and out of juvie and high-security prisons like San Quentin. Behind bars, he became the lightweight and welterweight boxing champ. He didn't just survive the gang wars, he won them. Covered in real scars, Trejo was once brought onto a film set to keep a drug-addicted actor clean and was cast as a villain on the spot. He wasn't acting. The rage in his eyes was real, earned in cells, alleys, and blood-soaked rings. Sean Connery wasn't born James Bond. He was tougher. Raised in Edinburgh's working-class slums, Connery delivered milk, polished coffins, and worked as a nightclub bouncer for real gangsters. He once fought off an entire gang trying to mug him, and won. On the Bond set, he broke stuntmen's noses and insisted on doing his own fights. His fists were his best gadget. James Caan, best known as Sonny Corleone in The Godfather, brought terrifying authenticity to his roles. A real-life black belt, Caan trained with martial arts legend Takayuki Kubota and hung out with mobsters to study their behavior. He once broke a co-star's nose during a fight scene and didn't stop filming. Paparazzi who got too close to his daughter caught fists instead of photos. Arrested for assault more than once, Khan called it setting boundaries. He didn't fake rage, he lived with it. These weren't guys playing gangsters. They were gangsters who picked up a script. Hollywood didn't make them dangerous, it just gave them a camera. They worked in pain, with injuries, and had pure grit. Some actors buckle under pressure. These men broke bones and kept going, because for them, quitting wasn't an option. Pain was part of the job. Sometimes, it was the job. Mickey Rourke had Hollywood in the palm of his hand, then walked away to fight. Literally. He left acting to pursue a brutal boxing career that shattered his nose, crushed his cheekbones, and split his tongue. He trained with legendary coach Freddie Roach and sparred world champions. When he returned to film, his face was nearly unrecognizable from injuries and surgeries, but his spirit was sharper than ever. He wasn't interested in roles that required acting. He wanted pain. Rod Taylor, the Aussie brute behind the time machine, insisted on doing all his own stunts, even after breaking 3 ribs during filming. He never told anyone. Once, during a choreographed fight, a co-star insulted a crew member. Taylor knocked him out cold. When asked if he'd consider retirement, he replied, "Why? I'm not dead yet." Gene Hackman lied about his age to join the Marine Corps at 16. He served in China, threw fists in street fights, and took that same intensity to Hollywood. On set, Hackman was known for his explosive temper. He once dragged a photographer into traffic by the collar. In another scene, he punched a wall so hard it cracked, and the director kept rolling. Co-stars respected him, but they feared him too. Hackman didn't need rehearsal. He needed space to explode. These weren't pampered stars sipping green juice between takes. They were war-torn, bruised, and still showed up on time. For them, acting wasn't an escape. It was the only thing that hit back as hard as life did. The actors whose trauma turned into talent. Some actors dive into pain for a role. These men were already drowning in it, and the camera just captured the aftermath. Robert Mitchum was a drifter during the Great Depression, hopping boxcars and brawling for cash. He worked in mining camps and spent time on a chain gang. In 1948, he was arrested for marijuana possession and served time behind bars. But instead of destroying his career, it made him a star. Known for his cold, detached stare, Mitchum rarely rehearsed. He sometimes drank before takes. He once headbutted a reporter, punched a photographer mid-interview, and kept talking like nothing happened. On screen, his menace was real. Off screen, it was worse. Oliver Reed didn't need a script to bring chaos. Known for drinking over 100 pints in 4 days, Reed showed up to set bruised, belligerent, and ready to brawl. He once branded himself with a lit cigarette during an interview. Another time, he took on 5 rugby players during a pub fight, and won. Reed died in a bar in Malta, mid-shoot for Gladiator, after arm-wrestling strangers and downing a dozen drinks. When he played violent men, it wasn't performance, it was personality. Charles Bronson grew up dirt poor, one of 15 children. He worked in coal mines as a teen and served as a tail gunner in World War II, flying dangerous bombing missions. Silent and intense, Bronson was called the scariest guy I ever met by Steve McQueen. He broke 2 knuckles punching someone during a scene and finished it anyway. He rarely smiled off screen, avoided parties, and lived with monk-like discipline. His rage didn't need direction. It came from somewhere deep and very real. These men didn't channel pain for the camera. They carried it every day. The audience could feel it because it was never fake. The actors who needed discipline and danger. Real danger doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits, disciplined, deadly, and absolutely in control. These men didn't explode, they struck with precision. Bruce Lee was lightning in human form. By his teens, he'd already mastered Wing Chun, fencing, and boxing. He created his own martial art, Jeet Kune Do, and trained with such intensity that his punches couldn't be captured in real time. Directors had to slow the footage down just so audiences could see him move. He could launch men across a room with a 1-inch punch, and once broke a stuntman's ribs by accident. Hollywood refused to give him lead roles, so he went to Hong Kong and became a global phenomenon. Bruce didn't just fight on screen, he fought racial bias, systemic rejection, and still rose like a storm. James Coburn trained directly under Bruce Lee, mastering full-contact sparring and Jeet Kune Do. He shattered ribs during fight scenes and refused to take painkillers. relying instead on meditation to manage his rheumatoid arthritis. Even as the pain twisted his joints, he delivered lines with a smirk and a steely gaze. He raced cars, rode motorcycles without helmets, and once walked away from a crash that wrecked his vehicle. Bruce Lee called him one of his most disciplined students, and you could see it in every movement. Tommy Lee Jones was a Harvard-educated Texan with a rancher's fists and zero tolerance for laziness. He once slapped a director for rushing a scene and could memorize pages of dialogue in minutes. Off-screen, he breaks horses and runs cattle. When asked if he enjoyed acting, he replied, "No, I just do it well." That brutal honesty defines him. Jones doesn't care about stardom. He respects effort, mastery, and people who show up ready to work or ready to bleed. This wasn't about being loud, it was about being lethal, calm, composed, unbreakable. Real gunslingers with real ammo. They weren't just cowboys on screen, they were forces of nature, men who lived the roles long before the cameras rolled. Clint Eastwood survived a real-life plane crash during his military service. When the aircraft went down off the California coast, he swam over 3 miles through freezing, shark-infested waters to shore. Years later, when producers tried to change his scripts, he threatened them with the same calm menace he brought to his roles. He performed all his own stunts, enduring desert heat, wild horses, and long days in the saddle. On camping trips, he carried loaded firearms, not out of fear, but because that's just what you did. John Wayne defined American masculinity on screen, but behind the scenes, he was even tougher. A football injury ended his athletic career, but he never stopped pushing through pain. He filmed with broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and later, while battling stomach cancer. In The Shootist, he was dying in real life, yet still rode horses and delivered lines like a titan. Despite losing a lung to cancer in the 60s, he refused to let anyone call him weak. His tombstone doesn't list his awards or accolades. These men didn't just wear cowboy hats, they carried grit in their bones. They were the kind of men who made dust storms look like background noise and death itself blink first. Actors known for being Hollywood rebels. You can't tame men like these. They didn't just challenge co-stars, they challenged the entire Hollywood system. Steve McQueen started life stealing cars and landing in reform school. Later, he joined the Marines and saved 5 fellow soldiers from drowning when their tank slipped into the ocean. On screen, he was the king of cool, but off-screen, he was gasoline-soaked chaos. He did all his own stunts, including that iconic motorcycle jump in The Great Escape. Directors often found him drunk or high on set, yet he still delivered perfection. Diagnosed with cancer, he fled the US for experimental surgery that was aggressive but didn't save his life. Kirk Douglas was the hammer that cracked Hollywood's blacklist. After surviving a deadly helicopter crash in 1991, he walked away bruised and kept working. Years earlier, he had joined the Navy, was injured in a depth charge explosion, and later became famous for his volcanic temper. He once threatened to throw a director off set for changing a single scene. After suffering a stroke in his 80s, Douglas relearned how to speak just to deliver one final speech. When he said, "I am Spartacus," he wasn't reciting a line. He was reclaiming his voice, his legacy, and standing up for every silenced artist in Hollywood. Humphrey Bogart earned his famous snarl from a war injury in WWI. He drank heavily, called out injustice, and once told a studio head to go to hell and still landed the lead. He acted through esophageal cancer and supported blacklisted artists during the McCarthy era, risking his own career to do what was right. These weren't actors who followed the rules. They made their own and forced Hollywood to follow. What their tombstones don't say. For these men, legacy wasn't built on awards. It was carved in pain, silence, and dignity. Many of them didn't want Hollywood mentioned when they were gone. Lee Marvin, whose brutal roles defined war films, had a tombstone that only listed his Marine Corps service. No mention of the silver screen. To him, what mattered most happened long before he ever heard action. Audie Murphy, the most decorated American soldier of WWI, slept with a pistol under his pillow and refused to talk about his trauma publicly. He once challenged a man to a duel for disrespecting a veteran. Despite all the medals, he saw himself as broken, never heroic. Charles Durning never glamorized what he lived through. Shot multiple times on D-Day, forced into hand-to-hand combat, and a survivor of a Nazi POW camp, he returned from the war with lifelong nightmares. He once said, "I don't talk about the war, I can't." His face stayed kind, but his performances carried something darker, something that couldn't be faked. These men weren't looking for Hollywood immortality. They already had something more sacred: honor, scars, and a quiet kind of strength. The kind that doesn't need to be written on a gravestone to be remembered. In an industry obsessed with legacy, these legends remind us the loudest men are often the weakest. And the strongest, they let their silence speak volumes. Why? The roles seemed real. Hollywood loves authenticity, but these men brought something more: raw experience that bled into every performance. When Rod Taylor wrestled wild animals on set or punched a co-star unconscious, no one asked if it was scripted. He simply refused to fake anything. Mickey Rourke's comeback didn't rely on acting tricks. It relied on pain. His face, warped from real boxing injuries, carried stories no screenwriter could invent. Bruce Lee didn't choreograph martial arts to impress. It was life or death philosophy, sharpened by challenge matches and cultural resistance. His punches weren't designed for cinema. They were forged in rebellion. Steve McQueen didn't use a stunt double for motorcycle jumps. Why? Because pretending wasn't in his vocabulary. These weren't roles. These were reflections of pain endured, trauma survived, and instincts honed in places far beyond Hollywood. The directors may have called cut, but for these men, the scene never ended. Modern actors can bulk up and train for months, but no regimen builds the kind of steel born in war zones, prison cells, or back alley fights. These legends didn't need to pretend to be dangerous. They simply remembered. And that's what separated them from the rest. Not technique, not talent, but truth. Modern actors can bulk up for a role. They can learn fight choreography, hire vocal coaches, and live in character for months. But what they can't replicate is lived experience, the kind of truth that bleeds through the screen even when the dialogue is silent. These men didn't become legends because of performance. They became legends because of presence. Their scars weren't prosthetics. Their stares weren't scripted. Their silences were louder than dialogue because they spoke from places no script could reach. In a world obsessed with appearances, they were the real thing. In a town full of illusion, they were forged in the fire of real violence, loss, survival, and consequence. They didn't need to prove anything. The camera just happened to catch a glimpse of something rare, authentic masculinity, for better or worse. They weren't perfect. They were unpredictable, often broken, but always real. That's why their legacy endures. Not because they were actors who pretended to be tough, but because they were men who survived everything thrown at them and kept showing up. In an age of filters and fame built on nothing, these men remind us what it means to earn your legend.